I like to think that I don't have trust issues. I've been suckered in by the empty promises of many video games in the past, but I always come back with renewed faith and optimism that maybe things will be different this time. I think you have to, because most games aren't disappointing or string you along through a series of false truths, but we tend to remember the games that do breach our trust in a significant way. Expectations can often run wild before a game comes out, but when they're fueled by developers who are trying too hard to make their game sound appealing, then what's a boy to do? Make a video, apparently. It's certainly the easiest way to cope with a sense of injustice that permeates my entire being whenever a developer goes against their word, and it's also a helpful way of highlighting some of the more systematic problems in the industry as it is today. There have been reviews taken out of context or games getting misleading adverts to paint it as something completely different, and I'm wondering at what point did we decide that games weren't able to speak for their own qualities? Isn't it easier to just make games that people want to buy and play instead of lying about everything, knowing that people will find out the truth in the end? Short-term gain for a long-term loss, which is a bad business model whichever way you look at it. Sort yourselves out.
There is a difference between flat-out lies and, let's say, garnishing the truth with lies, because often a developer will over-exaggerate the qualities of their video game in order to make it seem better than it actually is, and for the most part they're allowed to do that within reason. I'm more so talking about any cases where, let's say for example, you call an apple an orange, because despite what you think you might be able to gain from that, people will work it out eventually that you're just not telling the truth at all, and then you become a liar.
There's really only one place to start with in a video talking about lies surrounding video games, and that's with our old friends Electronic Arts. We'd have a decent case for saying that their name is a lie, since I don't remember the last time they made anything even remotely artistic, but I don't need to remind you how checkered EA's past has been as well. I made a video on it recently, which might be worth a watch for some extra reading, but something I didn't mention in there was their treatment of the Battlefield franchise. Hasn't always been terrible, but recent games have had a lot of fan backlash for a variety of reasons, and also Battlefield Hardline wasn't very good, and also Battlefield 4 was glitchy as hell on launch, and also Battlefield 3 was advertised to come with a free copy of Battlefield 1943 on the same disc if you bought it for the PS3 and then just didn't. What seemed like some kind of stalemate breaker in Sony's favour that could drive pre-order sales through the roof quickly deflated when people realised that EA were talking shit. It was a different time in 2011, we didn't know what was coming.
I feel like pre-order and console exclusive bonuses were just coming in around about 2011 as a way of convincing the world that some people were excited to play your video game in the future. But console exclusivity has always interested me because of some companies' desire to boost up one console above the other, potentially for market share. Clearly, EA saw the PS3 and thought, hey, we can make a lot of money here, but they did so in a way that made them liars, and they didn't really try and hide it very well.
Fairly self-explanatory this one, and at least by EA's standards, not all that bad considering their ethical standards for being thunderous assholes. But it is pretty wild how far EA backtracked on the promise of a free game once people had caught on to their shit. Battlefield 1943 came out 2 years prior to Battlefield 3, and therefore represents some decent value to be included alongside a new game on the same disc, making the PS3 version significantly more attractive at a first glance. Prospective buyers were under the impression that they were getting a free game right up until they checked the disc and found nothing on it, leading to EA and DICE backtracking to a position of PS3 owners being able to buy the DLC a week earlier than other platforms, which just isn't the same as getting a free game. Are EA confused? Do they need me to explain it for them? Yeah, I don't charge much. One impending class action lawsuit later, and EA caved, finally offering Battlefield 1943 free of charge for owners of Battlefield 3 on the PS3, and I'm really glad this got resolved, otherwise we'd have countless other stories of publishers pushing their luck with promised incentives before quietly taking them away. Battlefield 3 is rumoured to be up for a remastering that will likely release alongside Battlefield 6, and maybe we'll see what EA have learned from all of this. Hopefully more than nothing. This video isn't gonna turn into a victory lap for EA's greatest failures or anything, but the harsh reality is that I can't talk about developers who have lied to get their game better publicity without talking about one of the biggest culprits of that in recent memory. This time though, I don't want to talk about their treatment of promotional material, and instead tap into their vast catalogue of game-related fibs and lies. Seems like every other game they make comes with a claim or a promise that will do something specific or won't have some bad thing like loot boxes, only for, wouldn't you know it, EA haven't got the moral fibre to stick to their words and not be manipulative dickheads. I was going to talk about Star Wars Battlefront 2 and the many ways in which EA exploited their player base to rinse them for as much money as possible, but I don't think there were many lies related to it. Sure, they said there wouldn't be a season pass and all the DLC would be free, but that's like saying that housing is cheap in downtown Tokyo while Godzilla is smashing most of it up. It's not much of a victory. Not technically a lie though, so I'm left to look at the other dead horse in search of something to beat. Mass Effect 3 and its terrible endings. I wish I didn't have to talk about it anymore, but what you gonna do? We've heard it all before. Mass Effect 3 had a big role to play as the end of one of the best trilogies of its type and needed to have a satisfying ending to this saga that gives sufficient closure to 5 years of rich, engaging storytelling. And that puts a lot of pressure on the writers to deliver something that keeps everyone happy. Except that's impossible, surely. Mass Effect has so much appeal from a storytelling perspective because it asks the player very frequently to decide how things are going to go down and often who stays alive and who doesn't, which would naturally have quite the knock-on effect on the endings of future games. If EA and BioWare want to have a story that stretches across 3 games with telltale levels of player choice and variance in choices, you'd need at least 50 different endings to cover all possible outcomes, and that's a lot of work. The thing is that a lot of personnel at BioWare came out and said that having just 3 endings wouldn't be right, and that Mass Effect 3 would have to have so many different endings for every different player's route through this trilogy, but history speaks for itself. Shepard does his thing, and there's different coloured explosions, and Joker crash lands and stares into the distance and sees a reminder that if you're enjoying this video and want to see more, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications of every new upload, and really, the fanbase has every right to be disappointed and want more from their ending. BioWare were telling us for months that Mass Effect 3 wouldn't have a simple choice at the end of the game to determine the ending, and yet here we are! The internet would have been a much happier place if they just told the truth. I could fill this entire video with Kickstarter campaigns. Isn't that bad? That's bad, isn't it? Hardly paints Kickstarter in the best light, but the platform has done a lot of good for creators who are genuinely interested in involving fans in a deeply rewarding project. Given Kickstarter's popularity, I think it's only natural that some projects haven't gone all that well and have been characterized by mismanagement and poor communication between creators and backers, often ending up as a tales of fakery and lies. I don't think many Kickstarter creators set out to scam some money out of internet randos, and instead it's a case of biting off more than they can chew and failing to deliver on so many promises that people have actually put money down for. It's the same rough dynamic as investors being angry with a company for posting a significant loss, but there's a lot less risk with Kickstarter because most of the time people know what they're doing. I could talk about Star Citizen for being too ambitious for its own good, or Mighty No. 9 for being marginally better than nothing, but no single project embodies what it means to fail at Kickstarter than the Ouya. Too many valves, not enough console.
I remember a time when Ouya was trying to crash the console party by being a more affordable, more customizable alternative to the 3 main manufacturers. And clearly this resonated with a lot of people based on the amount of money that the Kickstarter raised, but with that comes added pressure. Because now you really do have to fulfill a lot of the promises. You have to find games that want to be ported to the Ouya, let alone exclusives to give it that extra incentive to buy the damn thing. But the Ouya had more problems than just that.
If Google, with their giant piles of money, are struggling to make a console that people care about, then it's no surprise that Ouya had a hard time getting their project too far off the ground. There's a lot of ambition here, but Ouya knew they couldn't directly go up against Nintendo and their ilk, and so attempted to harness a more custom-built crowd who would be interested in tinkering with this console to maximise performance. The problem is that a lot of the marketing surrounding the Ouya tried to emphasize this fact by saying that the tech inside this little box wasn't anything special, which is encouraging from a modding point of view, but not so much from a I put real money down to make this thing a reality and it's not much more than a phone chip in a glass box. Ouya promised a cutting-edge, state-of-the-art modern console that could have an absolute ton of games loaded onto it, but as the project took shape and started to run wildly out of control, these statements that were made to ensure people backed the console come across as disingenuous and deceitful. Obviously, Ouya bit off more than it could chew and never intended to scam 63,000 people out of their money, but creator Julie Ehrman still managed to piss $8.5 million up the wall on failed prototypes and terrible marketing. So, mismanaged with a light dusting of bullshit promises that never came to light. How long do you reckon the Stadia has got?
You shouldn't believe everything you see in a trailer. I mean, we've been doing this for a while. We've seen a fair number of bullshit game trailers that over-exaggerate features and qualities of a game so far that the devs don't really have to put much work in. The advertising team did so much work. The game has people's attention. It's got great publicity. You just gotta make a game that is roughly like what was shown off in trailers. We like to think we're better. We like to think we're smarter than this and we won't fall for it, but we do every time. It's just as well that E3 didn't happen this year, because at least now we've got time to recover and reset our expectations.
Not something that is entirely exclusive to video games, though. Every year we seem to get exciting movie trailers cut to perfection with artsy music for films that are so far below the level of quality that the trailers were hinting at. So you can't read too much into a short video that is designed to make the product look as flashy as possible while omitting some of the more egregious qualities, but there's a big difference between dressing up a game to be the best version of itself and flat out lying. So many games have had issues with front-loading their reveal trailers with maximum graphical output, only to then strip everything back for the game's release. Definitely a trait of most of Ubisoft's recent games, some more famous than others. Mind you, none of these games were misleading enough to warrant a lawsuit, but something like Aliens Colonial Marines doesn't come around very often. Thank fuck for that. I don't think anyone was expecting anything too incredible from this game, but the original trailer certainly turned a few heads. That first E3 demo was spectacularly good, and a really impressive showcase of some fancy lighting effects, which immediately brought it to the attention of a host of journalists and excited fans, as it looked like Aliens would be getting a next-gen xenomorph hunting experience for the ages, but alas, it was too good to be true. Well, maybe not, because we'd get Alien Isolation soon after, and that was pretty good at making me poo, but Aliens Colonial Marines just ended up looking and playing like shit, and subsequent trailers after the original demo weren't able to hide all these downgrades. The difference between the two was so large and such a misrepresentation of the final product that a lawsuit was incredibly inevitable, with Sega having to pay out $1.25 million for the false advertising behind Aliens Colonial Marines. A game that promised so much but currently sits at not a lot on Metacritic. And while Sega bore the brunt of the financial penalties, it came out shortly after that developers Gearbox had moved staff from Colonial Marines to work on other games like Borderlands and Duke Nukem Forever, while still collecting full payments from Sega as if the workforce was unchanged. So everyone is shitty and we don't deserve a goddamn thing. Just let Creative Assembly make more horror games. That's clearly the best way forward. At least the AI isn't dog shit. My parents used to say that developing a reputation for lying is one of the worst things you can do. I'd argue that murder or exploitation are worse things, but being in a position where no one believes a word that comes out of your mouth isn't exactly something you should seek out. Especially with video games, because you're relying on the consumer's trust in what you're saying about your new game for them to one day purchase it, and when you've had a career as long and as colourful as Peter Molyneux, years of lying tends to catch up with you eventually. Mainly that no one takes you seriously anymore, based on example after example of spewing pure bullshit that never had a chance of coming true. Doesn't matter if you created Dungeon Keeper and Fable if you can't go 2 minutes without spitting some lies. Eventually you'll start pissing people off. And I want to underline eventually, because for a spell, Molyneux was able to get away with lying about all his games all the time because he was an enthusiastic character who sounded like he had genuine excitement for his game. Like a child who says that their new toy can shoot laser beams out of its eyes. Unfortunately, the lies start to mount up and a worrying pattern start to emerge, of Molyneux claiming that something like Fable would let you knock an acorn off a tree, which would grow into a tree of its own over the course of the game that simply isn't true, leading to Molyneux's credibility being slowly eroded over time to the point where it's widely recognised that Molyneux has a reputation for warping the truth, to put it nicely. Plus, it's at the stage now where no reality can ever be as good as what Molyneux is promising, since he made that curiosity cube where players spent months taking off layers to find the secret at the centre of the cube, only for the winner being a part of his new game, Goddess, but also not, because they fucked that one up too by not staying in contact with the winner after a time and never really panned out how they thought it would. Really, Peter Molyneux needs to keep his head down and let his games speak for themselves, because otherwise we might end up with another Project Milo, where he just looks a bit crazy.
She's in that pond. Every hand movement is being recognised. Being able to touch fish, being able to swish the water with her hand. Everyone who's experienced it, the hairs are standing up on the back of their head.
He could do more to help himself.
This is RabbidLuigi, and you can forgive Peter Molyneux somewhat because it turns out that he's actually dyslexic, and that would explain why he... This is RabbidLuigi, and it turns out... This is RabbidLuigi, and you can forgive Peter Molyneux somewhat because it turns out that he's dyslexic and tends to talk more emotionally than factually most of the time, and that would explain a lot of the inaccurate statements about his own video games. But for the life of me, I can't work out why they wouldn't just hire somebody to talk about Molyneux's games for him, because at least then he'd have a chance at some kind of decent reputation among the wider scope of the internet. You know, he's a great hype man for his own games and a brilliant cheerleader to have on the side, but not the best guy to be doing a press release to journalists. Unless his games have half the features that he says they do. Then they'll be amazing.
So, what topic would you like to see me cover next? Leave your suggestion in a comment on this video because I'll be taking the best ideas and making a poll on my community tab, which you can then vote on to decide what the next video is about. I'll be announcing the winner of the poll over on my Twitter, so make sure you follow me so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.